We open our broadcast tonight commemorating Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, and the 6 million Jews that were systematically murdered in the Holocaust. On this National Day of Mourning, we remember and honor the memories of the victims, and we say, never again. Yet this year, this phrase takes on new meaning. Tonight marks the first Holocaust Remembrance Day since October 7th, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Some 1,200 people were slaughtered by Hamas, while hundreds were taken hostage by the terrorist group that has vowed to repeat these acts again and again and again. And among the victims, among the hostages, are Holocaust survivors forced to relive these atrocities. Tonight, our thoughts and prayers are also for the victims of October 7th and for the hostages. And as Jews around the world are still recovering from this collective trauma, we are once again forced to witness the rise and spread of anti-Semitism throughout the civilized world, reaching levels reminiscent of 1938. And so tonight, as we commemorate the victims of one of the darkest periods in human history, we must all, Jews and non-Jews alike, once again recommit to never again, because never again is now. So please join me in a moment of silence to commemorate and to honor the victims. And now, Israel continues to await a response from Hamas for a ceasefire for hostages deal. Negotiations have been ongoing over the weekend, and several Arab media reports indicate progress has been made. The latest in the following report. Conflicting reports of optimism and pessimism for a deal emerged on Sunday as Jerusalem continues to await an official response by Hamas regarding a new hostage and ceasefire deal. A second day of talks was underway in Cairo in an attempt to reach an Egyptian and Qatari-mediated agreement. Early Sunday, Palestinian officials indicated no significant progress was made as Hamas continued to demand that any deal must bring to an end of the war, a condition which Israel adamantly refuses. As the day progressed, however, positive reports began to emerge that Hamas was willing to accept a deal, following a campaign of immense pressure by the United States and Qatar. As the Washington Post reported, the United States has asked Qatar to expel the Hamas leadership should they refuse the deal. According to the latest reports, the proposed deal would see multiple phases, with the first phase seeing a release of some 33 humanitarian hostages in exchange for a ceasefire lasting several weeks. Further phases would see an additional release of hostages, including IDF soldiers, for a potentially longer-lasting ceasefire. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced on Sunday that the Israeli government unanimously decided it would shut down the Qatari-owned Al Jazeera news network in Israel, a move the Israeli government has so far avoided so as not to anger Qatar, a key mediator in the negotiations. There are still 132 hostages being held in Gaza by Hamas. Over the weekend, it was announced that 2 men believed to have been taken hostage by Hamas were murdered. The body of Eliakim Liebman, who was believed to be one of the hostages, was discovered in Israel, mistakenly buried alongside another victim. His remains were identified through a complex forensic investigation. And Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the hardest hit sites on October 7th, announced that its resident, Dror Or, was killed on October 7th and that Hamas is holding his body in Gaza. His 2 children, Noam and Alma, just 17 and 13 years old, were also taken hostage and released in the first hostage deal. Their mother, Yonat, was also murdered on October 7th.
Israel Bonds, the heartbeat of solidarity, the powerhouse of support. When the Hamas-Israel war hit, Israel Bonds stood tall, proving we're more than just an investment, we're a lifeline. Investing in Israel Bonds isn't just a financial move, it's a declaration for resilience, strength, and a better future for Israel. Join us and let solidarity echo through generations.
And in further news, ILTV's Ariella Lachiani is at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv to hear what people are feeling in light of the recent developments. Ariella, what can you tell us?
Hi Ladar, yes, so I'm here now at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, where last night a rally was held by the families of the hostages still held in Gaza, putting pressure on the government to do everything they can to bring their loved ones home. The rally was held under the banner "Never Again" is now a phrase that has been repeatedly used since the start of the war, and one which is even more poignant today as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day. But I'm here now at Hostage Square to speak to a few people and hear what they have to say about a potential hostage deal.
Well, I think the Americans have to apply much more pressure than they're doing because they have the most powerful outside voice. I think, I'm not completely aware what the Netanyahu government is doing, but obviously whatever they're doing, it hasn't worked so far.
On the conversations as a journalist that I'm having with people here are telling me that enough is not being done with the government, and that the government itself is facing a lot of political issues, and that may be clouding how to get to a real deal and a resolution here as well.
Everything should be done to bring the hostages home. This is the fundamental promise of the country to its people. This is your homeland. This is, I'll say, our homeland. As a Jew, I feel it's my homeland. It was created to provide protection and somewhat like a response to not having protection during the Holocaust era. This is where one should feel protected by their government. And part of that mandate is to bring home the hostages Achshav. That much I will say. The details of what the government should do and the dealing that's going on, I can't comment. But there really has to be a reinvigoration of this promise to the people that was somehow weakened on October 7th. And bringing the hostages home Achshav will nourish and revive that promise.
From our perspective in North America, the hostage families are the most powerful force in Israel, and as it should be, and everybody listens to them, and all of this shows how influential the families are in the issue. So it's really important, and all of us hope that they come home soon.
And today marked day 212 of the war in Gaza. A barrage of rockets fired by Hamas terrorists in Gaza struck in Kerem Shalom, injuring as many as 10 Israelis. Shortly after the incoming rockets attacks, the IDF conducted airstrikes against Hamas targets in Rafah. And the question on people's minds today, does a truce deal for the release of the Israeli hostages mean an end to the war in Gaza? Prime Minister Netanyahu says the answer is no, and the Rafah operation will come sooner or later. More on this from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
In two separate announcements from official sources, Israel said it will not agree to a hostages for truce agreement with Hamas that includes an Israeli commitment to end the war in Gaza. Attributed by several reporters to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the statement went on to say that Israel will also not agree to mediators providing guarantees for an end to the war. The war continuing means an IDF operation in Rafah. Israel briefed the U.S. on plans to evacuate Gazans from Rafah before the offensive, but U.S. officials said that Israel failed to change Washington's view that the operation could put too many non-combatants at risk.
We've been very clear about that, which would have significant risk against civilian casualties. And outline an alternative course of action. We have done that for them, outlined an alternative course of action for Israel to dismantle Hamas. So you could imagine, that there's been some back and forth on that.
Meanwhile, IDF Chief of Staff Halevi met with troops in central Gaza and held an assessment with the chief of the Southern Command and reservist officers operating in the Netzarim corridor. Halevi hinted at a delay in further planned operations in Gaza.
צה"ל פועל בהרבה מאוד זירות, צפון, דרום, איו"ש, זה עם כוחות קרקעיים, אנחנו פועלים רחוק יותר, בעוד הרבה מאוד אופנים, פועל בהרבה מאוד זירות, יש לנו עוד הרבה מאוד משימות קדימה, צריך אורך רוח, אנחנו נחליף, אנחנו ננוח, נחזיר אנשים מרועננים, אבל אנחנו נשמור רוח חזקה שאני מקבל אותה מכם בצורה מאוד מאוד ברורה, נשמור הרבה מאוד נחישות לאומית, צה"לית, ועם הדברים האלה אני חושב שאנחנו נגיע בסופו של דבר לתוצאות הנכונות.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. And joining us now with more on the war in Gaza on day 212 is Senior Fellow with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Yossi Kupel-Vassel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we're about 7 months into the war, and it seems as though little progress has been made these past few weeks. Israel seems to be standing still. I mean, what do you make of this, and how can or how should Israel progress to achieve a victory over Hamas?
Well, I think this period of low-intensity warfare is important. It's important for two things. First of all, to clarify what is the position of Hamas with regards to the possibility of having a hostages deal, because we need to make sure that we did everything in order to release those hostages. And if it was possible, we should take the opportunity to do that. Unfortunately, it seems it's not going to be that possible, and Hamas still believes that what they have to get in return is the cessation of the hostilities, and this is something Israel cannot provide. So at least we did an effort so that we should know that we tried every possibility. Second, we have to deal with the Americans, and we are facing a situation where the United States supports Israel in its right to protect itself, defend itself, and so on and so forth, but at the same time supports Hamas in the most important issue, which is the ceasefire. And we have to clarify to the Americans that actually there cannot be a ceasefire under these conditions before we move to the next stage. Now, we also have to make sure that the Americans understand that we are making every effort in order to minimize the damage to civilians once we go into Rafah. And that's another effort that takes time to convince the Americans that this is the case. As a matter of fact, they are not convinced even after we presented to them all kinds of plans. They still have their own reservations about the plan. So this is another issue that is very important at this point of time before we enter Rafah.
So I want to get to the Americans and Rafah in a moment, but I do want to talk about a hostage deal. Many reports indicating progress, that perhaps a deal is imminent. Israelis want to see the hostages brought home, but as you mentioned, the question truly remains, how will such a deal affect the future of the war and Israel's essentially number one stated goal, which is the elimination of Hamas?
We have two goals, elimination of Hamas and releasing the hostages. And it turns out that you have, first of all, to convince Hamas that it is about to be eliminated before you can convince Hamas to release the hostages. And that is the right order of things. All the attempts to first release the hostages and then defeat Hamas are not working. And that is what we are seeing at those continuously going on negotiations in an attempt to reach an agreement and a deal. As long as they are not convinced that we are really going to enter Rafah and defeat them, they don't have any incentive to go to a deal. They want to finish the war in the way they envisaged it in the beginning, that Israel would stop short of defeating Hamas in order to release the hostages.
And so should Hamas reject this latest deal, what then? I mean, will Israel finally have the legitimacy from the United States, from the international community, to enter Rafah? I mean, just today we saw that Hamas fired a barrage of rockets from Rafah into Israel. So clearly the threat is there. Clearly Israel still needs to deal with Hamas in Rafah.
Well, I think it's not a binary situation. You either have the legitimacy or you don't. We are going to have more legitimacy once everybody realizes that we cannot reach a deal with Hamas. We are going to have more legitimacy following the attack on Kerem Shalom. There is more legitimacy because we are trying very hard to make sure that the civilians in Rafah are not going to be hurt. and we are gaining more and more legitimacy. Are we going to have full support of the United States and the Western world? No, because their major concern is to make sure that Palestinians are not hurt. Defeating Hamas is of a lesser importance from their point of view. That's why we have to realize that we are not going to enter Rafah with full legitimacy, but we gain more legitimacy, and that's good by itself.
All right, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Yossi Kupavasa, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you.
And as the Jewish community worldwide commemorates Yom HaShoah this evening, in Israel, Yad Vashem will hold its annual World Holocaust Memorial Ceremony, including an official state ceremony laying wreaths and events for local youth. This year, Yom HaShoah falls at a time when Jewish leaders are concerned as anti-Semitism is rising throughout the West. ILTV's editor-in-chief Maayan Hoffman has the story.
Jews around the world begin commemorating Yom HaShoah Holocaust Memorial Day today, this time under the shadow of an increasing spike in anti-Semitism worldwide. According to the annual Anti-Semitism Worldwide Report, published today by Tel Aviv University and the Anti-Defamation League, there has been a more than 100% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States alone. The report showed a significant increase in 2023 compared to 2022 across Western countries, including the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Australia, Italy, Brazil, and Mexico. This surge was particularly notable after the October 7th Hamas attack and amid the ongoing Gaza conflict. In cities with large Jewish populations, including New York City, there has been an unprecedented nearly 25% increase in anti-Jewish hate crimes from 2022 to 2023, with 325 incidents last year. Also in Los Angeles, police reported 165 hate crimes in 2023, compared to 86 in 2022. Depending on the definition applied, the ADL saw between 7,523 and 8,873 incidents in 2023, with assaults alone increasing by 45%. However, the report emphasizes that hate speech against Jews was already prevalent before Israel initiated its campaign in Gaza, including on major university campuses. It cautions against viewing the recent surge in anti-Semitism simply as an emotional reaction to the conflict. Quote, some anti-Semitic attackers emphasize their problem is with Israel, not with Jews, and then attack Jews and Jewish institutions, the report says.
There should be no confusion. The year is not 1938, nor is it 1933. But if current trends continue, then the curtain may well descend on the ability to lead Jewish lives in the West, to attend a synagogue, to frequent a Jewish cultural center, to learn Hebrew, to wear a Star of David, to wave the Israeli flag. October 7 did not start the fire. It helped spread a fire that was already burning.
The 150-page report compiles information from government bodies, police data, Jewish groups, various media sources, and direct observations. It features detailed essays that analyze the situation in different countries and a specific study on individuals who spread anti-Semitic content on X, formerly known as Twitter.
In recent years, unprecedented efforts were invested in fighting anti-Semitism. The bottom line is one: the efforts have failed.
And what started as a small anti-Israel encampment at Columbia University has turned international, as universities are continuing to deal with demonstrations on their campuses. So far, police have arrested some 2,000 protesters, and a new report indicates these encampments have been expertly planned for months by special interest groups. The details in the following report.
Universities in the United States continue to grapple with anti-Israel encampments as so-called pro-Palestinian protests spread internationally to universities in Canada, Australia, the UK, and Europe. Police across the United States arrested hundreds of protesters over the weekend and cleared anti-Israel encampments from college campuses in an attempt to restore order nationwide. So far, around 2,000 protesters have been arrested from coast to coast.
A good operation, no one got hurt, no incidents, both institutions are happy, we're happy, and we're moving on.
And while some universities took a hardline approach, calling in the police to remove the encampments, others, such as Northwestern University, Brown University, and Rutgers University, caved and negotiated with the protesters, giving in to some of their demands that would see the students and faculty who participated evade any disciplinary action. Meanwhile, protests have turned international. Students from Havana, Cuba, to Toronto, Canada, to Sydney, Australia, joined in the anti-Israel protests.
Para mostrar el apoyo a los estudiantes de las universidades de Estados Unidos, para mostrar que los estudiantes en cualquier parte del mundo están juntos, unidos, al frente de esas fuerzas de Estados Unidos y de Israel.
So we are planning to stay here as long as possible. We want to make our demands clear. We want a response to them from the university, and we're prepared to stick it out until we get that response.
In Paris and Berlin, police broke up the demonstrations and arrested dozens of anti-Israel protesters after several were heard using hate speech against Jews. Meanwhile, a report from the Wall Street Journal uncovered disturbing information that the recent wave of protests were the result of months of training, planning, and encouragement by longtime left-wing activists and groups, which now pose a new and imminent threat to universities worldwide.
And in related news, ILTV's Rachel Safdie visited Tel Aviv University to speak to students who are in a dual degree program with Columbia University. She heard from them about the impact these protests are having on their lives. Let's take a look.
Did you know that Tel Aviv and Columbia University have a dual degree program? Well, I'm here today to speak to some of these students who are in their second year finishing up their time here in Tel Aviv and are supposedly going to Columbia, which has become the epicenter of the anti-Israel protests. So what was your reaction seeing that Columbia has become the epicenter of the anti-Israel protests?
So after October 7, like most people in Israel, I was very sad about the hostages and the ongoing situation, what's going on in the country. But there's also the side of me that's international, that grew up with a lot of these kids who not only go to Columbia, but also go to all these American universities and are pro-Palestine and supporting that movement. And nowadays, when all the information comes from TikTok and people don't actually know how to research and things like this, it's sad to not be able to speak with them and have them kind of turn on you and say, oh, but we can't find the sources on the Israel side, so we're not going to listen. We're just going to see one or two things here.
And what was your first reaction seeing that Columbia became the epicenter of the anti-Israel protests?
I was very upset. My family was also very upset. Unfortunately, it didn't really surprise me because we've been seeing this kind of simmering for a while. It also kind of came up in 2021 when there was a war at that time too. And overall, it's been very upsetting seeing it.
And has your decision to attend Columbia changed?
Yeah, so I decided to drop out. It had multiple factors, but I don't think I would have considered dropping or switching programs had October 7th not happened, because the way that Columbia, the whole social atmosphere changed was really disheartening, and it made me not really want to go there anymore.
So you will be attending Columbia next semester. How are you feeling regarding that?
So I think the biggest W for people who hate Jews, who hate the state of Israel, would be for us to not attend university. And I believe it's also the biggest victory for us if we do attend. And I don't mean that in any way violently, the opposite. I mean, it's beautiful if we attend. We're also able to bridge and have conversation with people who are different and present the Israeli that they don't see on the news. So that's for that.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast.